We have a baptism today, and this sermon takes its place in the advice that Ian will get from this point on. I'm sure it's not the first advice nor the last advice you'll ever hear, but it might be one of the more important pieces of advice that he'll get. And it really, I'll let you all eavesdrop in on this, but Ian, you're going to have so many competing priorities in your life as you grow older. So many things are going to compete for top dog in your life, and you're going to have to decide day by day, hour by hour, even minute by minute, what the most important thing is in your life. I mean, imagine a man who gets offered a project at work, something that is going to advance his career and probably make the family that he provides for gobs of money, will help further himself in his field. And unfortunately, the cost of that project is that he's going to have to work some weekends. His days aren't going to end at 5 o'clock like they normally do. He may even have to bring some work home. And he's thinking to himself on his drive home, you know, I went to the doctor last week and my blood pressure is a little too high. He said that I probably need to get to the gym and maybe do some exercise for maybe a half hour to an hour a day. And how do I carve that in there? And then he gets to thinking about his parents who live far away and need a lot of care. And how does he balance all of these things that he's got to measure in his life? What does he place the priority on? And all these things in his life are good, right? Taking care of his parents, the desire to stay physically fit, the desire to provide for his family, the desire to get ahead in his career and be able to be stable in his life. All these things are good. It's not like one of them is bad, right? They're all good things. But how do you decide what comes first? How do you decide how to spend the 18 to 20 hours that you're awake during the day, all right? So this is the problem for you, Ian, is that even if this is the last time that you're in church, right? Even if you never hear the name Jesus from this point on, you've got these competing priorities. You've got these things that you've got to think about. But now, since you're being baptized, chances are good that you'll probably come back at least once, right, to this church. Maybe even for your whole life. Maybe you'll be an Episcopalian and a Christian and a Christ follower for life. Let's hope so. If that's the case, though, it adds another layer of priority juggling to your life. Because we get this gospel reading today of Jesus saying to the large crowd that's following him, either you hate your mother and your father, either you dismiss your brother and sister, either you forget about your children, or you cannot be my disciple. Hard words, especially coming on the heels of last week when he was all about, if there's somebody among you who's being humbled, who's not being honored, you need to raise them up. You need to take the marginalized and give them stuff, give them power, give them a place at the table. And now he's saying, you have to hate even your life to be my disciple. So, Ian, today at baptism, you kind of start this journey to be Jesus' disciple. And you have to ask yourself, maybe not now, all right, but you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is this really what I want to do? Right? And you start with Scripture and you say, well, what did Jesus really mean when he said these things? Because we really can't believe, I really have a hard time making sense of the depth to which Jesus gives this command. He says, unless you give up your possessions, you cannot be my disciple. Is he really serious? Maybe that's why there were only 12 disciples. Is it the bar was so high? The bar was so high that only these people could give these things up. And you look at James and John, the fishermen, the sons of Zebedee. They gave it up. They gave up their careers. They gave up their careers as fishermen. They gave up their father. They turned their back on their livelihood and decided to follow Jesus. Are you that brave? Am I that brave? No, I'm not. I'm not. So the sense that I make of this reading, and you'll do this, Ian, as you grow in wisdom, is that you have to understand the context of what Jesus is saying. Now, each gospel writer had its own community that it was writing to. Luke had his community, Mark had his community, John had his unique community, and that's why that gospel is so different. So Luke's community may have had a few backsliders in it. You all know what backsliders are, right? Some of you do, some of you not. Backsliders are people that say they're going to do one thing but don't quite do it. They don't quite follow through. They sign up for something and they say, oh, I thought I could do it, but I can't do it. It's really too much for me. And they decided not. They flake out, right? So Luke probably had some of these people in his congregation or in his community. And so he needed something to kind of grab them and say, look, you don't understand the commitment that you're making. When you get baptized, you're all in. And for Luke's community at that place and time, it was under siege, probably. From the synagogue, from the Romans, there was probably persecution going on. So he had to make his followers know that what they were signing up for was not for the faint of heart, right? This commitment was serious and it was real. Flash forward to today, and it's the same deal for us. The commitment that we make in our baptismal vows, which we're all going to take, they are real. And oftentimes, we fall short of the mark. Do we dare call ourselves disciples? Do we want to be disciples? Because really what you'll find, Ian, is that life is pretty good, especially when you've got parents like Steve and Molly. Life is pretty good. You'll make friends. You'll fall in love. You'll eat really good food, right? You'll probably own a lot of cool toys. So if we were to actually follow Jesus' command, and we might have to, I'm allowing for that possibility, if we actually had to do all these things, we'd probably be pretty miserable. So why do it? Why would we want to follow these commands of Jesus? I think, and I'll just offer this possibility for you to conjure with, I think maybe Jesus is challenging us. He's challenging the listeners, us today, the people in Luke's day, back in the day. He's challenging us to say, what is important in our lives? What has to take priority? And what doesn't have to take priority? What gets in the way between us and God? Right? You know that there are some things that can get in the way of a good connection. Right? Sometimes, for me, my microphone here, we figured it out that sometimes my microphone goes out, and I'm amplified now, and then it cuts out. That's because one of your cell phones is going off on vibrate, all right? And it's nothing you can do about it. It's fine. But that's a distraction in the connection that I have with the soundboard back there. In our lives, there are these distractions that get us off target and that get in the way of our connection with God, right? We have to try to minimize those and take those out of our lives as much as possible. And I don't know what they are for you. That's for you to decide, all right? But the way that I image it is like this. It's like if you are the clay and God's hands are the potter's hands. If you've ever done any pottery, you know the feeling that you have when the wet clay goes around on the wheel and your hands are getting wet and the clay is really cold. Sometimes you might feel a lump and you've got to get it out, right, to make the pot more perfect. You want to get the pot to be what you want it to be, and you got to take out those little imperfections. That's what's happening in our lives. I think God desires us to be better disciples. And it's a challenge. God desires us to follow him more closely. And it's a challenge when these little distractions get in the way. I don't think your family's a distraction. I don't think your jobs necessarily are distractions. They can be. If the priority isn't in order, they can be. But here's what I would offer. A year ago, I decided to make some gelato, and it was a hazelnut gelato. And I don't know if any of you have ever done this, dealt with hazelnuts before, but hazelnuts are a fickle nut, okay? I should have just gone to Trader Joe's and gotten a bag of hazelnuts set, ready to go, but I didn't. I decided to go whole hog and just buy the hazelnuts in the shell. So first, you've got to crack all the shells, and I needed like a pound of them, right? So crack all the shells, that's done, but then there's a little skin around the nut that you've got to get off. And you can't just peel it off like a peanut skin. No, it's like hardened like concrete in there. So the trick that we did was we baked them for about 10 minutes, and then you roll them in a towel, and somehow the skin breaks, it cracks, and then you can just kind of hopefully slide the skin right off. Well, it didn't do the trick. So my mother-in-law and I spent about an hour with our thumbnails trying to flick the skin off the hazelnut. And I recommend trying this at home to see how far you get. Within about 10 minutes, my skin was like bleeding. My thumbnail had bits of hazelnut skin underneath and embedded in it, and it was a mess. I was in pain, I was in agony, I was crying. And my mother-in-law pressed me on. She said, "We don't want any of the skin in the gelato." I said, "Are you kidding me, lady? Really? I mean, the gelato is going to taste fine no matter what. Look at the chocolate we got. We got good stuff here. You know, it's going to be fine." But she was so strident on getting every little fleck of that hazelnut skin out. And it made all the difference. And I thought about that this week in preparation for this, because I think in our lives, every little distraction makes a difference. And in your life, Ian, there are going to be many. And you are going to have to decide one by one, day by day, hour by hour, what is going to come first. And some of the time you're going to make the wrong decision, just like we all have. And when that happens, know this. Know that God desires for you a life that we can neither ask for or imagine. But every time we get one of those questions right, every time we choose the better way, every time we choose what God would want us to focus on, whether it's loving our spouse more, whether it's spending time with our kids, whether it's spending an extra hour at the office to make sure something is done right, every time that happens, God's kingdom will open up to you, Ian, and you will be blessed. This is what God desires for us, to have this wonderful life which Jesus challenges us to accept today. They're hard words, but I think they're needed words, because sometimes we need to be put to the test. Sometimes we need to be asked what is really important in our lives and what is just superfluous. And sometimes we choose wrongly. But when we do, we are graciously forgiven. We are always welcomed back into God's good graces. And we are always offered this life eternal that we achieve today at baptism. Amen.